Hi, good evening. My name is Liz NDOYE, and I am here tonight to teach you the next lesson in art in the series called Art in Isolation, hosted and sponsored by the Hoboken Public Library. In the month of June, we have been focusing on the art of ancient civilizations. Our first lesson was about mosaics, particularly ancient Greek and Roman mosaics, and we talked briefly about Islamic mosaics as well. Tonight we are going to visit a totally different part of the world. We are going to travel to the southern hemisphere and look at the ancient art of Aboriginal people in Australia. Now, there are still Aboriginal people alive and well in Australia today, and they continue the tradition of art that I'm going to share with you tonight, but they have, I guess the best way to put it, they have modified their style of art under the influence of European people who have come to work with them in Australia. So I'm going to be showing you works of art actually from Australia done by Aboriginal artists in the same way that it was done over 40,000 years ago when the first Aboriginal people lived in Australia. On the easel behind me, you will see two fine examples of bark painting. Bark painting can be found all over Australia, but each tribal group in Australia, each Aboriginal tribal group, has their own individual style. The style that they use is based on their language group. They're called moieties. In the top end or Northern Territory of Australia, you will see this kind of art. It's typified by a lot of cross-hatching and line work, a lot of black outlining, and some work with dots. You may be more familiar with the kind of art that's done in Central and Western Australia, in which the Aboriginal artists really use mainly dots. So as I said before, depending on the region that you visit in Australia, you're going to see a different style of Aboriginal art. In the original tradition of Aboriginal art, the only colors that were used are what I call earth tones. In fact, Aboriginal artists still today make some of their paints from dirt. They grind soft stones to make dust and then mix it with a liquid to create pigment. In older times, earth tones were the only colors that were used, however. Now, however, you can see Aboriginal paintings that are made in a variety of colors, and often now they're made in acrylics, commercial acrylics, or oils. But these are some very fine examples of Northern Territory Aboriginal art. This one is one of my particular favorites because of the very fine line work. I'm not sure you can see it, but you can tell that this artist was very precise and very deliberate in his work. This painting is called Kangaroo Dreaming. And I deliberately said he because traditionally in Aboriginal art, only the men were allowed to do paintings. Paintings are very important in the religious traditions of Aboriginal art and Aboriginal people. And religion in Aboriginal culture in Australia is primarily controlled by the men. It is a matriarchal society because women own property or have control over property, and the care and feeding of the family. And they are the most important member of the family. But the men are the people who control religion. Therefore, much of what is sacred to Aboriginal people is done by men and oftentimes kept secret from women. So again, this is another Northern Territory bark painting, and I want to show you the back, because when I said bark painting, these paintings are literally painted on the bark of a tree. I'll knock a little harder so you can hear the sound of the wood. So the Aboriginal artists strip the bark from the tree, they soak it, flatten it, and then when it's dry, they paint. Again, a lot of fine line detail and cross-hatching in this particular painting. It's quite wonderful. This larger painting on the easel is also from the Northern Territory, but you can see some of the types of things that you'd see in Central Australian art in the desert region of Australia, where, as I mentioned earlier, most of the Aboriginal artwork is done using dots. Now I'm going to show you a painting that I created several years ago, and I'm hoping it will be the stepping stone and inspiration for the project that I will demonstrate for you towards the end of our lesson, so that you can do your own style. So now we're looking at a painting that I created several years ago, and I was inspired by Aboriginal art. I actually had been living in Australia, came back to the US, and I was studying art education at NYU and trying to figure out a way that I could blend the style and technique of Aboriginal art with my own particular iconography. So there are many shapes and forms in this painting that are my own, but as you can see, I've used the colors and the cross-hatching and the dots that you're now familiar with seeing in Aboriginal art. I've used the ochres. The other name for earth tones is ochres and umbers. There are yellow ochre parts in this painting, and there's raw umber and burnt umber. There's also siennas. Red sienna is another earth tone, and burnt sienna is another earth tone, and a little bit of black. Next, I'm going to do a demonstration of how you can create your own painting in the style of Aboriginal art. I want us to look very briefly at this bark painting again. This is a goanna lizard from the Northern Territory, the top end of Australia. And I'm holding this one up again because I'm in love with the shape of this creature. And when I start doing the demo for you later in the lesson, I want you to think back to the shape of the goanna. I also love it because it's asymmetrical. Notice the patterning on this side is completely different from the patterning on the other side. So that's something we're going to visit in the work we do tonight as well. I want to share with you the materials that you can use for this project, and I have some laid out here on the table to share with you. Acrylics. Acrylic paints come in all different kinds of containers. You can get them in tubes, you can get them in bottles, and interestingly enough, you can get these earth tones, the umbers, the siennas, and the ochres. You can specifically purchase those colors. Because we're in quarantine, however, you don't have to stick with the earth tones. You can do this project that I'm about to show you in any colors that you want. Remember I said that modern Aboriginal artists now use all kinds of different colors, so you don't have to limit yourself to the earth tone palette. I have poured out a palette ready to go to show you here with just the beautiful earth tones that I mentioned before. Another interesting thing, Crayola paints have a whole set of paints that they call multicultural paints. They claim that these colors are in all the different skin tones of people all over the earth. I like to think of them as the earth tones that I've been talking about. And these you can find in any art supply catalog. Multicultural paints. You're also going to want to have some fine point brushes and some unsharpened pencils. I'm sure that's putting a question in your mind. Why would you need that? I'm going to show you in a minute. Tape will be helpful for this project, and a Sharpie. So let's begin. I'm going to think back to the beautiful iguana that we looked at before, and it might be fun for you to think about common animals or even exotic animals that we don't have here in the United States as your starting point, and begin by simplifying the form of the animal just so that you do the outline. So here we go. I'm going to start with a similar shape to the goanna lizard. And once you have the basic shape of the animal that you want to create in your Aboriginal style painting, it's helpful to divide it up into sections. If you notice, even in the different styles of Aboriginal paintings, the artist has worked in separate sections. Let's look at that kangaroo dreaming one again. You can see that this artist has deliberately divided the animal into different parts. So that's what I'm going to do next. And now we're good to go for painting almost. Tape. One of the useful things that you can use tape for, if you are in love with the crosshatching that you see in the traditional painting, and notice the very fine lines that the artist actually did, and you're wondering, how can I get that kind of fine line detail? Here's how. You can take tape, and the blue painter's tape, the same kind of tape that a painting contractor would use painting the walls in your home, doing the edges. And you can use the tape to help you guide where your lines are going to go. Now, unfortunately, the only tape that I have available tonight is this wide tape. You want to find thinner tape, but this will work for our demo. So, this tape is too wide this way. You can get very thin tape that's maybe a third of the width of this tape. You can get that at any hardware store. You might even be able to find it at a supermarket. But this is a technique that artists have used for quite a while. you can create a patchwork of lines, very fine thin lines, by laying the tape down before you go to work. So one of my favorite colors on earth is the red ochre, or some people call it terracotta, that is the background color for most Aboriginal paintings. So I'm going to start with that. That's this color right here. And now you're going to see the beauty of using tape. You can paint quite easily. You don't have to get nervous or worried about being careful when you're making thin lines, because the tape is there. Wherever the tape is laid down on the painting, the paint won't go. Now we're going to pretend, what you would do now is let the paint dry and then peel off the tape. But I want to be able to show you what this looks like. So I'm going to peel off the tape. Not advisable to do what I'm doing. You don't want to do it while the paint is wet, because then you do run the risk of smearing it, which I just did. So learn from me, wait till the paint is dry. But remember, wherever the tape was, the paint will not show. And you can see that you have very thin straight lines by using that technique. And again, if you wait till this to dry, then you can lay tape perpendicularly across the lines that you've already painted and make this very delicate, fine, beautiful cross-hatching in the style of Aboriginal artists. Now, the pencil. The mystery will be solved for you. You can either use the eraser end or the hard, unsharpened end of a pencil. And watch what happens when you're ready to do dots. Perfect. Circles. And when you run out of a particular color, you just dip it in the wet paint again. I always like to do a test dot on my palette before I go to my painting. Make sure it's going to make the right size dot. Take any of the colors that you have. This is a beautiful raw umber, very dark brown. And do the same technique. Note with acrylics too, you want to use a heavyweight acrylic, not a very thin liquidy acrylic. It works best particularly with the dot making. I mentioned that Aboriginal artists, when they're working in the traditional style, often they will fill in their shapes with this gorgeous red ochre color. And they might do that, the whole background they might fill in with this color first. Another nice thing about this project, you don't have to worry about streaky painting. You can always go back over it if you want a smoother surface with another layer of paint. So there shouldn't be a whole lot of need for perfection when you do this kind of work. I personally find it very relaxing and soothing. I love working in patterns. All right. Once this is dry, then you can do the cross-hatching technique. You can do dots. You can have at it with any kind of pattern in any colors that you like. If you don't have any tape at home at all, then I recommend you get a brush that's relatively fine point. One way to control fine detailed work is to hold the brush in this silver part. Do not hold it at the end of the handle. Hold it way down by the hairs of the brush in the silver part. Get your paint, and you want to rest the side of your hand on the paper, and it will enable you to do a very straight, careful line. And so on. So I think now you can get a sense of how you could create this kind of image at home in your own time. I hope that you enjoy it. I invite you to do further research in Australian Aboriginal art. The Aboriginal people have been extraordinary at surviving in modern times. As I mentioned before, they have been on Earth for over 40,000 years. Check out Aboriginal art. And in closing, I want to thank the Hoboken Library for enabling us to have these art lessons in isolation and to allow you to be creative in your time sheltering in place. You can find more of the art in isolation videos at the Hoboken Library website. Do visit, check out all the lessons that we have online, and create